thank you all for joining us, if you're listening or watching in today. So as we mentioned before through our communications to our client network, here at Veritas, we've been hearing that people have been trying to adjust and accustom themselves to teaching at home. And a lot of the stresses that people are presenting to us and seeing for us is this issue about how to feel confident and competent in educating their little ones at home. A lot of change happening there, and of course also juggling not just the teaching component of that, but also, then the work commitments as well. So a big thank you to our friend at St Andrew's Cathedral School, Derek Champion, here to give you a bit of an insight or an introduction of him. He's the leader of wellbeing, character, senior housemaster, and secondary school teacher, as I mentioned, at St Andrew's Cathedral School here in Sydney. So thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to answer a few questions we have about teaching at home and what our people are experiencing at the moment.
Okay. Well, hey, look, happy to help out and put across some ideas, and hopefully it'll be of use to some of your clients.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So getting started, I mean, a little bit of perspective from I suppose a teacher's understanding at the moment. What's it been like teaching during this time, teaching remotely? And do you think the education industry has learned some things during coronavirus?
Absolutely. I mean, teaching in this remote phase that we're in currently has been really challenging for teachers. I mean, some staff have been able to transition without too much difficulty because they're just very early adopters of the technologies that we've all become reliant on. But I would think that the vast majority of teachers have had to do a lot of upskilling very quickly. And they've had to do that with regards to tools like video conferencing, which is something that I'm sure a lot of people have had to upskill in of late. But they've had to upskill a lot in video conferencing, and also take on and use a lot more of our learning management systems, which we use, which we already did use, but in terms of the degree of functionality, teachers have had to really step up their their game with that, just in order to engage students, to track student learning, and just to keep it interesting. And that's hard. It's been really hard. So I think that in many ways, there's some positives that have come out of it, in that we've all had to learn a great deal more about using technology, which has been good. But the same challenges that everyone else has had to go through, trying to work from home and keeping those boundaries between work and home, which are really challenging. So teachers have had that difficulty as well. A great many of teachers would have young children as well, and that's a big thing to have to go through. So it's been hard, but there's positives. Like teachers, I guess we get to stay home, we get to look after our kids, we get to keep working. And for a lot of people, perhaps some people sadly lose their jobs, and then you think about people who are working in emergency type services and health. I mean, they're obviously really in a difficult spot.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we should also predicate that along with being a secondary teacher, you're also a father of some younger age children yourself, who are probably that primary school age as well. So getting rolling into some of these questions we've got you today. I mean, we're going to work through, for those of you at home watching, we're going to work through the questions in regards to sort of the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, and then the end of the day. So starting with the beginning of the day, what would be some advice you'd have for parents at home about how they can best settle their children or students at the beginning of the day? So how do you set them up for a big day in the home classroom? And what are some tips that you'd give them in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different depending upon obviously the age of the kid or the student. And if you've got senior secondary school students, it's probably very likely that they've got a good space already at home to work. It's probably quite likely that they have developed a fair bit of agency around their own learning. And so they're able to get on with things without too much intervention from you with regards to the physical space or the level of instruction and prompting and supervision every day. So, for senior students, and particularly senior students who have always done well at school, many of them are actually finding that they can do this. they can work in this space. Yes, they find it a bit monotonous. Yes, they get a little discouraged at times. They want to see their friends. But in terms of getting on with the work at the beginning of a day, they're pretty capable, and you might just need to make sure they're out of bed on time, and that they maybe, and even perhaps that they went to bed on time, and they have some breakfast, for example. But the younger they get, obviously, it gets really challenging in terms of providing, the right space and getting them in the right sort of headspace to work during it for the day. And I guess when you're at school as a teacher, you've got the advantage of having the classroom, which is in many ways removed of any distraction. And so we set up the physical place in order to help us do our craft. And for parents at home, it's difficult because it depends upon your space, depends upon, what you're able to do. And you obviously don't want to go too far with it. It needs to be something that's reasonable. But if you can remove distractions, find them a good space to work, and get them set up, and we're talking now about sort of middle school type students, and particularly primary school students, then that's going to be of a big advantage to you once work gets going, and then you've got your own obvious work to do. So with primary school students, particularly for the very young age, kindergarten, year 1 and 2, they need a lot of support. And so making sure they've got everything they need in that space to work during the day is really important. So all the pens, all the pencils, all the scissors, paper, and maybe even a small little whiteboard if you can do it. They need their drinks, little snacks perhaps around as well, all those things, just so that they don't have to get up and move around as much, because they're going to want to. And keeping little kids focused is extremely difficult. So, even the best home learning environment is not going to be enough to keep those little primary school kids going for very long. And that's just the reality of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it sounds really what you're explaining there then is a big part of it is having an environment as best as possible, because understanding it's not school, but having an environment as best as possible that is conducive to learning, so free of some other distractions, and in fact probably not just plonking them down at the kitchen table, but turning the kitchen table into somewhat of a classroom. And then with that last bit of a comment you were saying there as well is sort of maybe looking at what short, sharp bursts look like, rather than trying to sit down for your traditional 6-hour school day or whatnot.
Absolutely. I think flexibility in this scenario is so important. And if you go into that whole homeschooling situation thinking that you're going to be able to do that, you're going to be disappointed. And that's discouraging for parents. And a lot of parents are type A personalities. They are, they work hard, they're high achievers, they have always done things well and properly. And then they think, well, that's what I want to do now with my, year 1, year 2 kid, and then do my job at the same time. And I really think that's unsustainable. And putting yourself under that pressure for any long period of time is probably too much. And so, yeah, you really have to the point you make about short, sharp bursts, particularly with your younger students, is probably going to be best.
And being kind to yourself by the sounds of things as well. I mean, there's going to be certain things that you're going to be able to get done, putting your teacher hat on, your parent teacher hat on, and other things that you're just going to have to let slide. And that's the nature of the beast that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the student ability to learn at school is really varied. So, we have students who would work exceptionally well no matter where they are, but the majority aren't that way, and a significant number need a lot of support. And so, a homeschooling situation, the amount of work they're going to achieve is very different. And so, I think parents know their children when they're very young, kindergarten, year 1. It's very hard to know, but the longer they've been in school, you get a sense of what kind of learner they are. And so you would obviously then say, well, look, what do I think is going to be achievable in this situation for them, and then work work your way through and try and get some things done. So yeah, I really think that's important. And we've actually reduced the amount of work that we think a student would get through when we're setting lessons for remote learning. So teachers have already taken that into account. So for example, we don't give any or as much homework in the secondary school. We reduced the amount of work for a year 7 to year 10 student to around about 60% of a normal lesson. And then that would only be then further revised for kindergarten through year 6.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we've done that already, but then at the same time, all those other variables that come into play, how they're going in any one given day, how they're feeling, their ability in a given subject and area, their interest, all these things that come into play.
Sure. So the next question I've sort of got for you is one that we've been hearing a lot from parents, and I can sympathise or empathise with how this would be really confronting in a stressful situation. But something that we're hearing a lot is our children are used to a certain individual, a trained individual such as yourself and your colleagues who are the leaders in the classroom. So amongst all the other changes that we're asking our children or the children to adapt to in the learning environment, we're now also asking them to look at mum and dad as the leader in this new age classroom, or this new classroom in this environment. And what a lot of our parents are hearing back is, you're doing it wrong, or I know how to do it better. Do you have any tips or tricks with how a parent can respond in these situations, or or avoid this, or how do they can move through that to try and gain that bit of leadership or direction back from their child in that instance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's very challenging. And at times, the best thing to do is just to give that situation a bit of a break and start again and say, right, why don't we do something else for a minute? Because that's often an expression of frustration from the student or the child, because they've kind of hit a wall in their own thinking, and they're stressed out by that, or they're just exhausted. And so there might be them telling you they need a break, and perhaps you need a break too. Like that's big. And if you're doing so many other things at once and multitasking and working, and know you've got a meeting coming up, then you're under pressure. And so it's not a situation whereby everybody's in the best frame of mind. But in terms of tips around that, I would be going straight back to the instruction, the task that's been provided by the educator, and saying, well, let's just go back then and have a look at what's been said, and say to your child as well, hey, I'm just trying to work through this with you. This is perhaps how I was taught it. Can you tell me more about how you've been taught it, and try and work it out that way? But what I do find with particularly younger students, middle school students, and then going down into primary, is that they will often perhaps not understand the original instruction. So whatever the task is, the teacher's probably given perhaps quite a lot of detail, and they've perhaps read it and misread it or misunderstood it, or needs some further prompting or instruction in how to do it. And they probably made a start, got into it, and then found that they don't know where to go. And they're frustrated. I've seen that with my own children. And then when we've gone back and looked at the task, often after having a break and saying, let's try something else for a while, we've been able to make some progress and work through it. So, the little people, little primary school kids, the nuance of instruction at times is really hard for them to understand. And so when a parent's acting almost like a teacher's aide, that's often the best thing, to go back to the actual task and have a think about it. Sometimes teachers will provide exemplars or examples. Working through those is good too, because that gives the child a bit of something to work from.
Yeah. So it's sounding really like number one is, don't take it personally. It could be more of an indicator of where your child's at in their energy and their focus or their understanding as well. And then second to that, don't try and barge through it and just keep moving. Maybe take some time to recognize, okay, is it a time thing? If they've been sitting still for a bit too long, maybe we need a break. Is it maybe an indicator that they haven't quite understood the concept or the question? And maybe if we slow down and learn this together, then we can sort of move through that. And even I heard a little bit of a hint there as well, as maybe in depending, one trick could be to actually make the child the teacher in a little bit and be like, okay, well, if I don't understand it, can you teach me it? And then inadvertently, and I'm not a teacher, so I could be well out of my sphere here, but you can learn by teaching others as well, and you're sort of getting an idea of where they're at with everything if they're teaching you as well. Maybe then you can offer some hints to nudge them where you think they need to be going.
Yeah, I mean, and quite often you'll actually know sort of what the teacher wants them to do, but they need to feel empowered in that way. And so that can be good for them sometimes. I think the other important thing to remember there is particularly with kindergarten, year 1, year 2, and even, I mean, as I said, I'm not a primary school teacher, but even in those early primary school years, a lot of the day is actually spent learning about how to work with others and how to work with people, and how and they spend a lot of time lining up, and they spend a lot of time learning how to behave appropriately. And so kindergarten teachers, year 1 teachers, they're really experts at being incredibly patient. I mean, and just so much patience, and really reinforcing all those right types of behavior and routines. So it's not normal for a kindergarten, year 1, year 2 student to be able to regulate emotion and be cool, calm, and collected. They just aren't. They just aren't. And so parents, shouldn't feel like they should be, because they're not going to be. And that's part of school too.
I think that's a really interesting insight you made there, in particularly for those of the parents that maybe have a year 1 or year 2 student, that a lot of the day isn't actually how much of the arithmetic book you might get through, but actually learning, interacting with others, and some of those fundamental behaviors. So even if you are coming across these conversations, maybe they shouldn't, and pushback, from your child, maybe that shouldn't be viewed as a negative, but as an additional learning opportunity in how you talk through situations like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, in a way, I mean, it's crucially important for them to learn those skills, but it's hard. It's very hard to do that. And, and that's where that patience comes in. But then also knowing that times you maybe don't have the patience for it right then, and you need to step away. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. And it's that's part of the skill set of being a teacher. And a lot of parents are very, very good at what they do. And, if they wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, then they probably would have done that. But, this isn't for them. And so it's just about, okay, how can we get through this and find some good positives in it? And perhaps there's some learning somewhere amongst that exchange.
Brilliant. So just quickly then, transitioning into during the day. So when they're sort of more towards the middle, or once the day is off and running. We've already touched on this slightly, so we don't need to exaggerate on it too much, I don't feel. But how long would you suggest keeping a child focused on one particular topic? Should we be changing subjects regularly? I understand it's probably varying for different age groups.
Sure.
And then also, I mean, obviously this is probably more from the perspective, you already mentioned that St Andrews themselves have cut down some of the workload each day, but should parents be trying to stick adamantly to the workload that's been sent home, or is it more of a suggestion? So there's two questions in there.
Yeah. I think with the first one, as you say, it definitely depends on the age of the student. With the senior school students, particularly upper secondary, you would be reasonably confident that most of them would be able to work through what's been provided with the changes that the teachers put in place. So we've been essentially just mirroring the timetable that we have at school for upper secondary or for all secondary. And so they're expected to work through that, but it's not like they'll be conferencing the whole time or anything like that, because that wouldn't be sustainable. It's just too exhausting for everyone. So they would have moments where they're just working. So I think for most secondary students, they might find it easy to just stick to the normal timetable and set those boundaries around that, and have recess when they normally do, have lunch when they normally do. And so they're changing subjects with their timetables. We've given them about half an hour extra in the day to manage that and have a little bit more of a break, mostly because we just recognize they need a break from screens. because, and you would know a lot about that sort of thing. And that's a real challenge for everybody right now, just getting that break from screens. But as they get down into the primary school situation, I mean, for me as a parent who's also an educator with my own child, my youngest who's in kindergarten, we've very much seen for us, it's been about numeracy and literacy. So we've said that's our focus. First and foremost, if we can do anything in a day, we want to get through the reading and the writing, and then some of the maths. And that's been because, they're obviously fundamental skills to develop at that young age. Learning is so sequential. You need them to build those basics so they can then move forward as they go. And so, the inquiry tasks, the more creative tasks, we've seen them as more bonuses. If we can get to them, great. If we can't, that's just the nature of the beast. And so that's been something we've done. And then with our other child who's in year 4, so you sort of, it's getting a little bit older, there I think it's about keeping them, changing as they need to. But I've found that sometimes the preference is to do what they want to do. So they'll choose the ones they want to do. And so you need to check up and say, well, why did you skip that one? Or how come you didn't do that work? And it's often because they find that challenging, and that might be an area that you can work on with them. But, even with upper primary, it's about making sure they take breaks for recess and lunch. And they're doing that because, they're on screens. And they'll often very quickly, they'll say, oh, it's recess, and they'll transition straight to something on a screen that they shouldn't be doing, like playing a computer game. And the real hard thing about that, honestly, is that that's how they're often connecting with their friends at this time.
Yeah.
They can't go around. You can't go around to your friend's house when you're a primary school age kid. So what do? Well, we all jump on and play a game together. And now that's okay. That's okay. A little bit of that's okay. But if you're trying to manage screens, you've got to be careful and limit that, I guess, because it can become a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Some great insights there as well. So sort of really reading the room a little bit with your child. And I think there was really good insight you put as well there from your own personal experience with, and coming from an educator probably gives our parents some confidence in this as well, that there's some key fundamentals, particularly for your lower primary, your literacy and your numeracy. And if you can get through that in a day, that's your pass-fail mark, and anything on top of that is a good bonus. And then something else I sort of picked up there as well is sort of, you can sort of probably get away a little bit with it, because if your child will do certain things that they feel comfortable and excited to do, and then you could probably actually cut down your engaged teaching time, because then if you can let them roll with that, then you come back and help them with the more challenging stuff or stuff they find less interesting. You can sort of maybe steal 5-10 minutes there to go and do what you need to do with your day at that point as well. So this is a big one. You mentioned it before, screens, all this sorts of thing. And obviously a lot of us working from home at the moment, even if we're not working from home, but we're working with clients, whatever it might be, we're connecting via your video conferencing platforms, your Zooms, your WeMeets, all those sorts of things. Big question we're continuously getting, and something that a lot of parents are finding pretty stressful, is any tips on keeping kids engaged and motivated whilst you as the parent or both parents are on a Zoom or video conferencing call? And should you feel guilty if during that time you're just plonking them in front of a video game or a screen to sort of keep them left of the video conference, so they're not, jumping on your back at that time as well? And what would you suggest as some of the key consideration in helping meld your child's day into your work day more broadly?
I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge first up that it's actually fine if they're not working when you've got that key call, because that's a high pressure situation for you. You need to have you need to be focused on what you're trying to do. And so, if that means that for that hour or 2 hours, perhaps it can get to, I know sometimes it can be longer for some people in certain professions, obviously. If that means that they don't achieve a great deal of work in that time, then I think, look, that's okay, because you have to you just have to manage it the best you can. And particularly with kindergarten, year 1 and 2, and well, even, I mean, it's going to range all the way up, but particularly at that young age, then they can't concentrate for that long. They need instruction and support. So if you know you've got a task that you're doing for work that's going to go on for a long period of time, there's just no way you could set it up so that they would be fine without you. It's not going to happen. So I don't think anyone should beat themselves up or feel pressured or feel like they have let anyone down in a scenario like that, because it's just not something that would be achievable. And so therefore it means that, perhaps that's the time where you say, look, hey, I've got something really important coming up and I need you to only come and see me if you absolutely need to. You can often arrange it so you can keep half an eye on things perhaps, and give them some reward then they're going to like doing for some work they did earlier in the day. And if that means that that's a particular television show, then so be it. If that's a little game they like, then great. I think that's perfectly fine. And that's certainly been the advice that I've read from plenty of educators, plenty of principals on this particular issue, because it's something that everyone has experienced in the last few weeks, and it's very hard. So yeah, I think that's just the nature of it. And if that means that they're on the screen then for a little while, then I think that might just be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. I think that's some really good advice for our parents as well, because like you said, maybe it is the way it is, and it's about accepting that, and if it does mean a little bit more screen time during the day, then you can always make up for that a bit later in the day with some other things, I suppose, as well. But taking that pressure off yourself for both you being in an important situation and your child being in an important situation at the time, but maybe it's just where you need to concentrate on yourself. They can get their reward for having done their arithmetic or their literacy already at that point, and that's how you can manage your way through it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's often the way to go, and they also might get a reward in terms of something to eat or drink, these sorts of things. Or you reach into your bag of tricks there, and you just whatever you need to do to kind of survive. I think in that scenario, and I think everyone's going through it. I mean, the reality is, Oliver, it's like this is a 1 in 100 year global crisis. I mean, this is such a big thing for everybody. So it's not like there's a school down the street that doesn't have to deal with this right now. Yeah. It's not like the kid next door doesn't have to deal with this to some extent right now. They do. Yes, there are lesser degrees here and there, but generally speaking, everyone has been impacted significantly.
Yeah, brilliant. So now starting towards the end of the day. So what you'd probably find as a teacher, and I'm sure our parents are finding it as well, as we're starting at the end of the day, kids are starting to get a little bit grizzly, start to get a little bit tired. How do your colleagues sort of manage that part of the day? How do you sort of keep them focused for that last little push to get through to the end of the day or the end of the learning?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and part of it will be what their teacher has sort of structured for them, but generally a bit of a rule that we tend to work off is that we like them listening more in the morning and doing more in the afternoon. So that's often a trick that works well with secondary school students. It certainly would be the case with primary school students as well. Once again, you get down to that kindergarten year 1 and 2, it's complicated because the doing needs quite a lot of supervision to keep them on track. But for year 3 upwards, potentially, certainly 5, 6, and through to 12, they can be doing more in the afternoon and perhaps listening more and getting more instruction in the morning. That's often a good way of keeping them going. So, if there's a inquiry task, a creative task, it could be a history type research task. It might be some creative writing that's already in their day from their teacher, shifting that to the afternoon so they can just do a bit more and perhaps, follow something they're interested in to a space and occupy their time. Then that's often a good way of thinking about it. Maybe you're leaving some more of the reading for the end of the day, these sorts of things, because that higher level of concentration and attention span that's needed to really work through a complex task with lots of instruction, more often than not, that's better done in the morning. It's not always going to be able to happen that way, of course, but that is one particular thing that educators look to do. which can work as well.
Yeah. So it sounds a lot like there, where it's not so much managing once the student child's become grizzly, but actually setting them the whole day up. So you're proactive, like you said, you're putting your listening up the front, and then you're doing at the back end. So we're distracted, we're engaged, and we're not getting a bit squirmy and fidgety. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think that helps. And with your secondary school students, they can concentrate reasonably well. As I said earlier, they have some agency around their learning. They probably know when they just need a 5 or 10-minute break.
Yeah.
Teachers have built, into that lesson time for them to be able to do that, so they can hopefully regulate a little bit about their own learning in space. But with the younger children, we spoke before about the fact that a lot of education is actually about teaching them how to learn and teaching them how to pace themselves. So you might need to be the one that does suggest, hey, it's time for a break. Hey, it's time for you to just put that down and do something completely different for 5 or 10 minutes to avoid the grizzly tide thing, and come back to it later, and so on and so forth. So, they very much do need that help managing their own energy and focus.
Yeah, for sure. Brilliant. So, sort of getting towards the last couple of questions here as well. Look, I'll wrap the 2 questions I've got up into one for you. So, what else do you think is important for parents to know or consider during this time? And probably a little bit of a personal insight for yourself. How do you unwind after a big day of teaching and educating? Because we're hearing a lot from parents at the moment that they're having wines before midday is starting to get a bit hard to balance.
Yeah. I think teachers would be right there with your clients there, but it's hard. It's very hard because of the screens, and I would come back to that in terms of being aware of how much that takes it out of you. We're certainly finding that as a school. That's something our teachers are telling us, that they are of a day of being on screen, particularly when you're conferencing, and if you're a major contributor in a conference, it's exhausting. It just takes it out of you. There's so many reasons why. You have to pay extra attention for different cues and the way people are interacting with you. I mean, you would know a lot about this, and so there's a lot of extra stuff that has to happen that you have to do, and that really takes it out of you. And so I think knowing that you're going to probably be more tired, and knowing that emotions are obviously going to run pretty high at times, is important. And the other thing that has come up a lot for us, and an insight that we're getting, particularly with all students, particularly with our year 12 students and upper secondary, because that time of school is such a rite of passage, is that interaction with their peers. I mean, it's such a big part of school, and such a big part of being young, and they can't do that right now, and that's hard. And so, they need a little bit of help with that, particularly the younger primary school students, I think, because they don't have the ability to organize those things themselves. So finding some time for them to perhaps chat to some of their friends is good. And we've found that talking, even on the phone as opposed to conferencing, can be a good thing as well. So hearing the voice and just reading that way, just to try to have a little bit of less screen time. And that's been very much my own way to try to unwind. And our advice, obviously, that I work with wellbeing, part of our advice to our own staff, and things that you and I have talked about in the past, is just those basics to health. It's the sleep, it's the eating, it's the nutrition, and it's the and trying to manage our use of technology, and recognizing the good parts of it and the bad parts of it, and the things that might perhaps make us more anxious, which social media can certainly do, and reading too much about the world right now it can be very taxing on a person. So that's very much been our advice to staff.
Yeah, and that's very similar to what, some of the things that we've been looking at the moment as well, in particular with mental fatigue. And you're quite right. We're finding even with adults as well, you spend the whole day on your screen and your conferencing calls, but then to stay then connected with your parents or with your friends or with your family members or whoever it might be afterwards, you're getting straight back on the screen again to have another Zoom. And a big thing that we're talking about, again, also going back to one of the very first things you said about keeping those boundaries between work and home as well, is have the half hour, 45 minutes between the end of, in this with student school, and the end of or the work day, before you might get into those social interactions, of just time away from a computer or a screen, whether you're going for a walk around the block, whether you're doing X, Y, Z, just have that little bit of like an eye refresher in a way, but it's really a mental fatigue refresher as well, just to get a bit of a disengage, a bit of a shutdown, a bit of an unwind before you just roll straight into whatever's next, wherever that might be.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure those watching have got a lot out of what we've spoken about today. Some great insights, as I mentioned before. A lot of the cases we're seeing at the moment, it's not really to do with the health impact of coronavirus or COVID-19, but the lifestyle factors. And obviously, juggling now for a lot of our clients the role between work and now teaching at the same time has been a great stressor. And hopefully we get through this and people can reflect back on some additional skills that they might have learned in time management and balancing and stress resilience. And I think on behalf of everyone, and I've heard this from the people I gathered these questions from, every single one of them said the questions might have been different, but every single one of them wanted to pass a big thank you on to people like yourselves, and they've got a newfound respect for how the work that teachers do and the fact that you can manage to put up with their children's stuff for a day in, day out, and they're truly mesmerised by that. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it, and we'll chat to you again soon.
No worries. Thank you, Oliver, and yeah, happy to be a part. Thank you.